My journey with Dark Souls genre started in 2011 when I accidentally bought Dark Souls instead of Darksiders at a local game store. Up until then I wasn't even aware of Dark Souls. But well, I can say since then I have been playing Souls games non-stop. As much as I enjoy main Souls titles themselves, I was never into Souls-like games. They all felt like cheap cash grab attempts trying to capitalize off of Miyazaki's success. I played majority of the Souls-like games, but I could only force myself to finish a handful of them. However, my view for Souls-like games changed entirely with this year's releases. Lies of P was the first Souls-like I cared enough to see all the endings, follow all side quests, and unlock all the achievements. It delivered a quality I would never expect from a Souls-like. Following Lies of P, nearly a month later we received another really well-made Souls-like, Lords of the Fallen. It quickly hooked me with its world design and I found myself enjoying another Souls-like. This year was amazing for Souls-like genre. Two great games released back to back and I'm already hyped for their future sequels. Fully completing both games left a question in my mind: which game is better? As much as I enjoyed both games, I have a favorite. I liked one of them much more than the other, and in this video I will try to explain why I think one of them is a better Souls-like. But a quick disclaimer, before you get your pitchforks and your torches, this is an entirely subjective opinion. Your opinion may differ from mine, and it's a great thing that a single genre can appeal to so many different people. So let's get started. Comparing these two games is not as easy as it sounds. Yes, they're both Souls-like, but they are influenced by vastly different FromSoft games. It is more like comparing apples to bananas. They are both fruits, but they're nothing alike. Lies of P is a game inspired by Sekiro and Bloodborne. Among the Souls games, they are the most action-packed and fast-paced titles. On the other hand, Lords of the Fallen is a game inspired by Demon's Souls and Dark Souls, mainly Dark Souls 2 to be precise. I will do my best to point out the differences between these games throughout this video, so it is not only about which one I like more, but also it will give you an opinion on what each game is like. Without keeping this section too long, I want to jump directly into the topic. Atmosphere is one of the most important aspects of a Souls game. After all these years, I still remember my first time exploring Dark Souls 1. Right after you escape from your prison, a dark, depressive world welcomes you. It sets the tone right away. You are in the ruins of what once was a great empire. Lordran is not a scary place, but it is stripped from all the hope. It isn't demons or dragons or another outside force that destroyed Lordran, but their demise was humanity slowly going back to their roots. You are just a single soul attempting to recover an already lost world. If a Souls-like cannot present a well-written world, it already fails one of the most crucial aspects of the genre. There are so many Souls-like titles that just put bare minimum effort into atmosphere and world building. Both Lies of P and Lords of the Fallen managed to create a unique world. Lies of P takes place in a fictional city of Krat, inspired by 19th century France. From the moment you leave your train, game sets the tone right away. You have just stepped into the most advanced city of its time, but there's something wrong. Puppets that are tasked to serve you are hostile, there's no sign of life inside, and 10 seconds into the game you already know the disaster that took over the city of Krat. Throughout your journey you will travel to a variety of different places. Game never fails to put a convincing story behind why that place exists, why are you there. No matter where you go, there's a story and reason behind it. World in Lies of P is part of your story. It doesn't serve as a basic tool to feed you the gameplay. There isn't much comparison here. As I said, both games have beautiful worlds. Main difference between these two worlds is how they set up the disaster. Lies of P keeps the world building more grounded. Lies of P tries to stay away from fantasy elements as much as it can. Lords of the Fallen, on the other hand, can appeal more to people that enjoy dark fantasy setting. In Lords of the Fallen, you will venture into a world of demons, dragons, and creatures of the void. At first, Lords of the Fallen's world seems simple. Crusaders fighting demons. Your first hours into the game you will find yourself in a conflict between good versus bad. You will travel across the land that has been overrun by demons. You will see villages destroyed by their forces. But there's something wrong here. These people were left behind by Crusaders that were supposed to save them. As you progress more and more in this dark world, you will realize there's no good in these lands. Starting as a simple good against bad story, soon it shapes into two tyrant gods fighting over power, and even if you don't follow the story itself, world design does an amazing job to show you on any opportunity it gets. When it comes to gameplay, I have a clear favorite in this part. I enjoyed Lies of P's gameplay way more than Lords of the Fallen. When I was playing Lies of P, it felt like a game made by Fromsoft. I couldn't believe how good everything was. For the first time, a Souls-like managed to offer a quality close to main Souls titles. Lies of P had its flaws, but overall I enjoyed it quite a lot. Character movement was so smooth and flawless, animations fit perfectly to your input, and traversing between maps was a pure joy. I think Lies of P shines when it comes to combat. Developed by a studio with no prior experience in Souls-like genre, it is criminally underrated how good combat is. Surely there are minor flaws. Sometimes enemy attacks are just too hard to read and their attack moveset seems a bit faster than it should be, but it is something you get used to quite fast. I also saw a lot of complaints about dodge in Lies of P, however once you unlock the Link dodge ability, it becomes really satisfying. Despite its limited setting and no magic, Lies of P comes with a huge variety of combat options. You will have a massive arsenal of weapons you can customize as you wish. Throughout my playthrough, Lies of P managed to keep up this premium feeling. Despite having so many different weapon types and enemies, regardless of the enemy, combat always felt satisfying. Sadly, Lords of the Fallen's combat, best I can say is, it is okay. It's a decent combat that delivers what it promises, but that is all. It doesn't go out of its way to become a unique combat experience. At times, combat and movement feels really clunky. You as a human almost have super speed. Running looks silly and out of place. Some attacks cover so much distance that movement doesn't fit the environment you are in. If you're in a tight space or near a cliff, good luck because your character will go out of its way to jump off of that cliff. Combat by itself is nice. It is better than many of the previous Souls-likes, and it is definitely 100 times better than previous Lords of the Fallen. Sadly, it is not on the level of Lies of P in terms of how smooth combat and animations are. When you jump in Lords of the Fallen, a massive roll completes the rest of the animation. You will end up much further than where you were aiming with that jump. This is a clear issue developers were aware of. If there's a tight platforming, there's a good chance you would do the jump then roll off the cliff. Developers' solution was to add an invisible wall to edges of the cliff to prevent you from falling off after you jump. It is a solution indeed, but if the solution to a problem is adding invisible walls around your world, the root of that issue is already a failed mechanic and it needs to be changed entirely. Both games follow a similar approach to block mechanics. If you block an attack, you will lose a portion of your health. You can quickly attack and fill your health back up again. If you get hit before you do so, you will lose all the recoverable health. However, if you block at the correct time, you will parry enemies' attack and possibly break their posture. While blocking in theory is same in both games, the difference starts right here. Main idea behind this system is to tell players that it is okay to make mistakes. It lets you experiment different moves and expand your playstyle. Lords of the Fallen fails to understand what is the purpose of this mechanic though. For some reason in Lords of the Fallen, whether you parry an attack or block, you will still lose a portion of your health. In early game, your healing is extremely limited and your damage isn't enough to quickly fill back your withered health. Taking a lot of damage means you will have to retreat or rest at the first vestige point you can find. First real boss of the game has a slow moveset to teach players how to parry. However, when you lose health even after you parry the enemy, it will absolutely discourage players, and there's no reason to parry attacks if you're just losing health by doing something game wants you to do. Even if you parry and eventually break enemies' posture, critical damage is really low in early game, and overall you sacrifice the majority of your health to deal a mediocre critical damage. In Souls games, when you stagger an enemy, game gives you a room to land succession of attacks before you land a critical hit. For some reason, it isn't possible in Lords of the Fallen. When an enemy is staggered, you barely have enough time to land your critical hit, let alone extra attacks. Parry and repose system is a complete miss in Lords of the Fallen for this reason. However, it is a completely different story in Lies of P. Parry system is almost almost as satisfying as it was in Sekiro. Not only it acts as a traditional parry system where you end up dealing massive damage to bosses, parry in Lies of P takes this mechanic and expands on it. As long as you parry enemy attacks, you can break their weapons, which changes their moveset, makes them weaker for the rest of the fight. Lies of P pushes you to utilize all your options. There will be times you have to dodge, there will be times you will have to parry, but the game doesn't force you to play with a certain playstyle. As you progress, game offers you different upgrades to change your playstyle. So if you don't like the parry system, you can fully improve your dodges and play it just like you were playing Bloodborne. Lastly, I want to talk about bosses in this section. I will be really harsh towards Lords of the Fallen. There are 31 bosses in total in Lords of the Fallen. However, majority of the bosses are just regular enemies with a boss health bar. None of these bosses are an actual boss with a challenging moveset. They are simple, straightforward, regular enemies, and even if they possess a false sense of challenge, it is not because of various mechanics of the fight, but it is simply because they have more health and they deal more damage than they should. Lords of the Fallen follows the footsteps of Dark Souls 2 and adds so many meaningless bosses that the game goes with quantity over quality mindset. Among 15 reskinned bosses, 12 actual bosses and 4 NPC bosses, Light Reaper, Judge Cleric, Harrower and Tancred were the only memorable bosses for me. I find it unacceptable that a $60 AAA game has reskinned same enemies from beginning to the end of the game. Lies of P on the other hand has offered me so many great boss fights. There are 25 bosses in total. I enjoyed majority of the boss fights in Lies of P. They were all handcrafted, carefully balanced, well-made bosses. I can say that boss fights in Lies of P at least felt like actual boss fights compared to Lords of the Fallen. Now that I brought up boss fights, we have to talk about the difficulty in these two games. Video game journalists with all two of their brain cells created a false expectation for players and developers that a Souls game is so hard that you want to smash your controller. Over the years, Fromsoftware perfected the difficulty in Souls games. They are difficult, however they are still fair. This is what so many Souls-like developers fail to understand. A Souls-like and a Souls game is fair. There's no difficulty slider in Souls games because developers handcrafted each encounter and balanced everything based on a single difficulty. Then they offer you tools to make your game easier or harder based on your preference. In Dark Souls 1 you can shoot this dragon's tail for 5 minutes and then you will have the most powerful weapon you can wield in the early and mid game. Dark Souls 2 you can join Champion's Covenant to make your game even harder. FromSoft puts a challenge in front of you and then gives you all the tools to overcome that challenge. Lords of the Fallen fails to understand this. It mistakes difficulty with frustration. Lords of the Fallen is not a difficult game, it is a frustrating game. It constantly puts you in annoying situations to overwhelm you. Pretty much in every area of the game there are hordes of enemies waiting to gank you. In every Souls-like there are some enemies that are such a pain to take down. Anytime you see one of them, you know it's going to be a painful fight. For Dark Souls 1 it was real skeletons and dogs. In Dark Souls 3 Black Knights were quite challenging. In Elden Ring when you see these abominations, just run the opposite direction. There are some challenging enemies in Lies of P as well, but in Lords of the Fallen the challenge during exploration comes from always being outnumbered, and pretty much every area there are multiple ranged enemies attacking you from a mile away. When you combine constantly being outnumbered with long distance between bonfires, it becomes exhausting quite fast. If you stop to look around for 2 seconds and enjoy the scenery, there's a high chance something somewhere will hit you with an arrow or a spell from like a mile away. When you only have 3 healings and you have to pass 100 enemies to make it to the next bonfire, it is more exhausting than difficult. Exploration aside, my biggest complaint with Lords of the Fallen is how easy all the bosses are. They're almost in slow motion at times. When I look back to all the Souls like I have played, Lords of the Fallen has some of the easiest bosses in the entire genre. I find it disappointing when I finish exploring a difficult zone and the boss waiting at the end dies in 2 attempts. On my first playthrough, there were only 2 bosses I had to try 2, maybe 3 times before I beat them. Bosses are some of the most important aspects of Souls-like. I really wish bosses in Lords of the Fallen were a bit faster and they had more moves, because bosses like Reinhold, the Emird and Pieta look absolutely stunning. Let's talk about Lies of P's difficulty a bit. There's not a lot to say about Lies of P's difficulty. I was quite satisfied with what game offered. Distance between bonfires were well placed, enemy density was well balanced, zones never felt too difficult difficult or too easy, but it is a different story when it comes to boss fights. I've seen a lot of complaints about boss difficulty, and I can understand where it comes from. Not all of them, but boss fights are hard in Lies of P. Some fights such as Luxasia, the second coming of Millennia, are quite difficult. I believe on my first ever playthrough, I died to Luxasia more times than I died in the entirety of Lords of the Fallen. Bosses are difficult, and they may even be too difficult for a casual player who wants to experience Souls-like. Personally, I'm fine with difficult bosses. I enjoy slowly doing better on each attempt and finally beating a boss over a period of time. This is why I have beaten Elden Ring at level 1 before, and I have beaten Lies of P without weapons. I like the challenge. For this reason, I'm also planning to do some difficult challenges for Lords of the Fallen. If you want to see those upcoming videos, consider subscribing, you won't be disappointed. Both games do good and bad when it comes to map design. I enjoyed exploring both worlds, and I have seen every part of each map. I want to start with Lies of P. Each area of the game feels unique and interesting. I absolutely loved the shortcuts in Lies of P. They feel like they were pulled straight from Dark Souls 1. Different sections connected to one another perfectly, and every shortcut serves an important purpose. When I was exploring Lies of P, it was quite easy to see inspirations from Dark Souls series. There are locations similar to Sand Fortress, Blighttown, and some more you can find in Souls series. All the existing locations in Lies of P are amazing. Problem is the ones that don't exist. You see, Lies of P has one massive issue with its map design. It is too linear. There are no alternative paths or optional locations. Everything you see in Lies of P is all there is. Locations are absolutely gorgeous and beautifully done, but having no alternative to your exploration might even be the biggest downside of this game. When it comes to Lords of the Fallen, map is huge. There are so many locations to visit and explore. Lords of the Fallen has a semi-open world map. During your journey, you will find many optional locations and hidden passages that will lead you to secret encounters or treasures even. Lords of the Fallen does a great job in building a massive world. Every location is connected to each other, just like you would expect from Dark Souls 1 or 2. Sometimes locations become a bit too confusing because of the axiom and umbral mechanic. I got lost quite a lot of times, and some maps just felt like a maze, but eventually I was able to memorize locations. I don't have a lot to say about world design other than one or two minor things that bother me. Vestige points are one thing. Sometimes game puts them in such places that it makes no sense. Quite a lot of times actually I found 2 bonfires back to back in less than 10 seconds of running time. Another issue is shortcuts. I had the impression shortcuts were only added to the game to call it a Souls-like. Good number of shortcuts serve absolutely no purpose, and oftentimes when I unlock a shortcut, I told myself, cool, I will never use this. Both games have great maps, but they also both suffer from minor issues. Souls and Souls-like are the genres I've been playing for longer than a decade now. I invested so much time in these genres and I enjoy them a lot. When I talk about games of these genres, I don't hold myself back from talking about their flaws. Even while comparing these two games, I was talking about their flaws more than their good. I must make this clear that I enjoy both Lies of P and Lords of the Fallen a lot. I think we are so lucky to have 2 amazing Souls-likes back to back. With the success of these 2 titles, the future looks bright for the Souls-like genre. I'm already hyped for the next game in Lies of P's universe, and I am also curious about what the next Lords of the Fallen will shape out to be. Will they fix all the minor issues, or are they satisfied with the current state of Lords of the Fallen? Between these 2 games, I must say I enjoy Lies of P more than Lords of the Fallen. On all my playthroughs, Lies of P always felt like a game that matched Fromsoftware's standards. Developers made this game with passion and did their best to release the best version of Lies of P. Lords of the Fallen, on the other hand, even after all these improvements over the first game, it still feels like their main motivation is to just make money. If you have made it this far, consider dropping a like and subscribing to my channel. Every bit helps a lot, and also let me know about your opinion on these 2 games. Everybody has a different taste in games, and your favorite may be completely different from mine. I read all the comments and I reply to them, so consider sharing your opinion on the topic. For now, thank you for watching. See ya.